How we feeling today? Are we up? All right. Oh man, first of all, I bring greetings from my father. He's doing a doctor's visit in Long Island. So he says hello, and thank you for, continue to be mature when he's not here, and show up. Man, I've been studying, and I still do the apologetic thing, and I'm running, I was just down in Texas at a conference, and I was working on my message to speak down there, and the basic thing is, I come up with 4 reasons why we need to understand apologetics. For those who don't know what apologetics is basically a defense for your faith. Why you believe what you believe. You ask your average Christian and say, okay, why are you a Christian? It's very difficult for them to explain it outside of the terms of Christianese. Some say it's a feeling. Some, and then you ask, how do you know God exists? And I'm telling you, atheists are eating these statements up. One person said, oh, because he speaks to me. So they say, oh yeah, God speaks to you, so that means you need some medication because you're hearing voices. Well, it's a feeling. Well, I got a feeling to slap you today. Is that a part of God? So we as Christians, we need to come to a place where we can articulate, and I'm going to talk about it. God is today's subject. And why God is, because if you ask your average Christian who God is, they come up with so many different explanations of really answers that would not line up with who God really is. So we were talking to an atheist, and he was like, I don't believe in your God. I don't believe your God exists. And I said, okay, what's your definition of God? Let's get down to the root of it. And he was, he talked about, your God is an angry God. He's an unjust God. He's an unfair God. He's a misogynist. He is all about him. And I said, I don't believe in that God either. So we're together on that. Because some Christians think God is a genie. They rub a lamp and you get some wishes. And I thank God that God is not a genie, because I would have passed up my 3 wishes years ago. Because I'm still looking for him to bless me. And trying to wrestle with this and articulate it. And the ironic thing is, the reason why this has to be answered so critically, because of Genesis 1:1. When you look at Genesis 1:1, for sake of time, we don't have to go to that. It says, in the beginning, God. And you've heard me say this before. If you can't believe that, if you can't come to a understanding, a grappling of this statement, in the beginning, God, then don't read the rest of the Bible. Because it only becomes literature for you. You have to come to a place where you stop and you resolve, what does this mean? Who are they talking about? Not only who are they talking about, but how can I come to a place where I can then stand and articulate who this God is? Because we as Christians, we believe in the beginning God. So outside of God, there was no beginning. It's funny, I've been reading this book, and there's this book that really wrestles you with the arguments against this. It's a book called Stealing from God. A very good book. And it talks about how atheists and a lot of other religions steal from God. The whole idea of this deity of God to make their case. C.S. Lewis says the best. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, he says, when I was an atheist, I always said that there can't be a God because this God, he's an unjust God. But I had to come to a realization when I became a Christian to say, okay, if I know unjust, then I know justice. Because in order for me to know unjust, I have to have something to compare it to. Right? So like and you heard me say this before, when they talk about evil, you only know evil because you've had an ability to experience good. Right? My daughter said, what do you mean by that? I said, put it this way. The only way you know is something's ugly. Right? Don't start pointing. Say saved in this church today. Only way you know something's ugly is because you've seen something beautiful. Right? So what this book talks about is that they basically, the arguments are set up on the premise that there is a God. So the more they argue, the more they express that there's a God. You know, in the book he talks, and it's funny, he talks about, the author was talking how this guy came up in a debate and was asked a question. He had a big shirt and you know, with the X through it and had a cross on it. And he was against religion. And he started talking about God, and he said, because one of the things we're going to go over is that God is immaterial. And he said, well, what else can you explain that there is material? There's non-material that exists. He said, because if I can't feel it, if I can't see it, then it's not real. He said, you just used it. It's called the law of logic. The guy said, what do you mean? He said, because you're reasoning. Logic is immaterial, right? Spaceless, and timeless. Is this too deep for you? So if logic and your basic reasoning is there, and it's funny because logic points to God. So if there's reasoning, this very thing that you're using to bring your argument against an immaterial being, then you're just proving my point. And he started going back and forth. Well, I don't believe that. He said, you're using it again. He says, no, I don't agree with that. I can't understand how immaterial. And he said, you're using it again. He said, the very thing that you're debating against is the very thing that you're using to express your point. See, but this is where we as Christians, we lack in our ability to start reasoning at this level. I got a message that I'm working on, and I'm using, I'm starting to add props to my message, and then part of the message is our chairs at a table. And I represent us as Christians when we first become born again as Christians. I look at the high chair. How many of you have kids? See, and the thing about the high chair, you're sitting in the high chair, is because it's set up at a place where you can't even hold yourself up. So they sit you there in order for you to hold yourself up to even be a part of the family dinner. So we as Christians, we start out in the high chair. And we start looking at it, and you look at the food, the progression of the food. You go from baby food to now cut up food to where you're able to start using the utensil. And as you grow and you mature in that space as an individual, then you are able to come to the table and you sit in that booster seat. Right? And your level of maturity determines what you're allowed to use as you are entering the spaces within that table. We as Christians, and the sad thing about it, you ever see an overgrown kid? You ever see that kid pushing himself in the stroller? Right, they sitting down. Right, and you're looking at that parent, you look at that kid, and but that's some of us as Christians. We are growing physically, but we're still keeping ourselves in a maturity level as a babe. And we don't have the ability to articulate why we believe what we believe. Why are you a Christian? To me, it's the best answer for all of life's ailments. It's the best point of reason when it comes down to it. So let's talk about God is. A little bit of time. So I'm going to speak fast. Are you ready? So Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning, God, and he continues saying, and I love it because most of Genesis 1 says, he says, then God, right? Then God spoke, then God said, depending on what translation you're using, then God, throughout the whole first chapter of the first book of the Bible is speaking about this God, but who is he? Some of the stuff you heard me say before, it bears repeating. I brought some definitions with it. So number one, God is self-existent. God is not caused by another. My son asked me, who created God? I said, that's the first problem. You assume that God was created. He said, Daddy, just answer the question. I said, you have some false assumptions built into that question. But basically, God is what they call the uncaused cause. We have to be able to understand that God was not created. You know, have you ever heard the law of causality? Okay, basically the law of causality says whatever began to exist, right, had a creator. So it talks about the cause and effect. God never began to exist, so therefore he does not need a cause. So he's self-existent. He's foundation of all being. Out of him flows. That's why when you hear Jesus talking to the woman at the well about the living water flowing out of him, he's talking about a bigger picture, a grander picture, but he's bringing it to a place where she can understand. But he's saying, look, out of me flows life. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't exist. I am the foundation of all that exists. And I love it. And Paul starts singing, he says, even the nature expresses this God we love. I'm like, I'm trying to wrap my hand around, and I asked one of the instructors, I said, let me ask you a question. Why is it because of the evidence is so strong that they don't believe?